computer. The recording is now in progress, and let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. All right. Well, I thank you for being here, each one, and appreciate your participation. Axe, I hate to see you go. It has been such a blessing, I'm telling you. This has been, a couple of y'all had recommended that we do the book of Acts, and I finally got there. I finally did, and thank you for your recommendation. If you have another one for a couple weeks or 3 weeks from now, if you got another great idea, feel free to give me your great idea. You can text me. I'm thinking maybe not right now, but text me, let me know. But I'd love to go through another passage of scripture, another part of scripture with you guys. And thank you guys for your participation. I normally have my screen set here, but I had some last minute things that I was like a little concerned about and whether or not I was doing it the right way. So tonight we are on Acts lesson 8 of 8, and we are ending tonight, but I hope and pray that this has been anywhere close to a blessing for you as it has been for me. It has been awesome. So thank you for being here and being a part of things. Here's where we've been. We've been through the church, and basically Acts is all about the church. It's the founding and the founders and how the founding of the church causes friction and internal and external pressures. It's about the first missionary that's converted and the founding of the church among Gentiles, the missionary journeys, the first theological meeting. Here's that first missionary journey on this screen here, as you can see. And then you also see the second and the third missionary journeys that happened there in half the chapter of Acts 18. It splits into two different ones. Here's a map of the second missionary journey, and here is the disagreement with Barnabas and John Mark and Paul and that trip that they took as they separated back in the book of Acts that we've already covered. And then, of course, you see all of the different familiar names of cities like Philippi, the Philippians, Thessalonica, the letter to the Thessalonians, Corinth, the Corinthians, Ephesus, the Ephesians, all of these different familiar names that you see all happen on the second missionary journey. And so it's really important to grasp and see all of these things that Paul did and the way that it was such an important thing. We saw that the Antioch church and the place that they were in Syrian Antioch was kind of Paul's home base. And so every time you see that Paul goes back to Syria, that's either the ending or the beginning of one of the missionary journeys. And we see this here on this map that's detailed. And I hope that the maps have been helpful. I may have even overdone it on the maps with you guys a couple times, but have the maps have been really helpful? I know a couple of you guys have said that they've been really helpful, because sometimes it just feels like it's just words and cities that you've never heard of, but then you begin to see it and okay, now that makes sense. So hopefully that is the case. And I even have a very special new map for you guys tonight. Aren't you all so excited? Yes, I know you are. All right, so off we go, and we're keeping on. Tonight we are going to be talking a little bit more about Paul's transfers and trials before kings, and Paul's trip to Rome and its obstacles that he encounters. Last week, we talked about, should Paul have insisted on going to Jerusalem, or should he not have insisted on going to Jerusalem? And so we talked about the different pros and cons. And some of you came away thinking, of course he should have gone. And then some of you thought, there's no way he should have gone. And you know what? As I shared with you last week, me and my dad can't even agree. And he's really smart. And I've studied this a little bit. So if we can't agree and we can't figure it out between the two of us, I'm waiting on one of you guys, basically, is what I'm saying. All right. So here was the homework. If you didn't figure it out, that's okay. But we had you reading Acts chapter 25, 26, 27, 28, those 4 chapters. And we've been doing about 4 chapters each week. And I ask you to notice these things and, kind of see those things. But more than anything, just something that jumps out to you from these last chapters in the book of Acts. And so we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I'd love for one of you to jump in and say, I did the reading and this is what really spoke to me. So please jump in, share with me what you got in your mind, something that really spoke to you from these chapters that we assigned as the reading. Anyone?
I got something.
All right. Thank you, Leroy.
Well, we've been reading and hearing and talking about this kind of same scenario. Christ that told Paul that he was going to, speak before kings and these rulers, and all these events keep coming up. They lock him up in jail for 3 years, forever, and years and stuff. And,
Yeah.
Yet he got word already what was going to happen, and it just keeps going until the end of the chapter. That I don't know, it is amazing. God saved him for that. And so that to me just jumps off the page, and I mean it's a lot of exciting little things that happen in here that we've all heard of. But yeah, he's on a mission, and I think and then that last part when he was going to Rome.
Yes.
On that ship, that straight beeline over there. That could have been called the fourth mission, I guess. Journey fourth. I don't know.
Leroy,
Anyway,
Leroy, you gotta stop preaching my material before I get a chance. This is not fair. It is not right, and I don't appreciate it. I just want you. You're going to see. I literally had the question mark after. I said, "Is this his fourth missionary journey?" And you're going to see because it was. And I literally just got emotional because what is beautiful. What you're just talking about is that God's will and His word come to pass. And it doesn't always happen the way that we expect. And sometimes there's more obstacles than we expect. And sometimes it's hard to get to that place, but God's will and His word come to pass. It's just a matter of time. And we see that here in this passage. There's no doubt. Paul is told, you're going to do this. And he remains in prison, but then he does it. And this is going to happen. And it does. And so it is so powerful to see. And we need to never forget that when God speaks it and He says it, and he reveals to us that He's at work, then we need to believe it will. It's just a matter of time. I appreciate that very much. Great observations. Good stuff. Anyone else that want to just kind of share what really jumped off to you from these chapters? Thank you, Leroy, for your part already. Anyone else? And by the way, we're always shooting everybody to have at least one piece of participation. So please feel free to jump in your part, and then you can be quiet the rest of the time if you choose, but you don't have to. But yeah, everybody, aiming for everybody to participate. Anyone else?
I have something.
Please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm in my car right now. I had to take my mom.
No, I think you're good.
So, okay, I'm a late bloomer here. So I was very confused about why Saul became Paul, and for whatever reason, these chapters really, I mean, it gave me a clear understanding of why his name changed, and or why he changed his name and became Paul instead of Saul.
Yeah.
And I was kind of tickled by that because for a long time, I was like really confused as to why that happened.
Yeah.
But I was very kind of taken back by his honesty that he gave when he was, I can't remember who he was before, but he kept, when he told, yes, I did all these things. I did persecute, and I did kill all these people for believing in Jesus, and now he's preaching about Jesus. So the fact of his honesty right there, that spoke a lot to me right there, that that he admitted his own his sins, that that he did all these horrible things, and he owned up to it.
Yeah. Well,
that for me spoke a lot.
yeah, no, and you know what? I think there's somebody who once said that every single Christian has a past, and every single sinner still has a future. And we need to remember that every single one of us, we all have a past, and we also have a promise of a future. And we don't need to be ashamed about our past, because all that does is say there's nobody beyond the reach of God's grace. And especially Paul, if you're dealing with somebody who literally killed people for loving Jesus, you would think that Jesus would say anybody but that guy. But that's not what he did. Instead, he saved him and made his biggest enemy his biggest spokesperson. And only God, right? I mean, only God does stuff like that. But it is powerful, and it is beautiful. And thank you, Michelle. Great observation.
And that was just more than, I mean, just that alone, that says a lot, because it's, like you said, it was his, kind of biggest, one of his enemies of, he was always against it. And now he was like, you guys have to believe that, and then him teaching everybody, and like on board the ship, and, everybody's going to be saved, just than they were, even if they were drifting around on planks, everyone lived on that boat, like he said they would. And then when the snake bit him, when he in the fire, came up and bit him, and then everybody was waiting for him to die, and he didn't. And they were just, then that proved to all these other people that he really had a connection with God and with Jesus. So I was just really, the ending, it just kind of, for me, just kind of brought everything together and really kind of sealed it for me.
Nice.
It gave me a clear understanding that I didn't have before.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that and this is important. I'm the reason I'm asking these questions all the time is so that you'll start watching for the things that matter to you. Because you can read the church, or you can read the Bible like a textbook, like I said in church on Sunday, or it can start coming alive. And when it starts coming alive, it's really a powerful thing. So thank you, Michelle. Good stuff for sure. And I appreciate your observations. All right, well, let's keep moving here and keep going.
Sorry, Pastor, I wanted to say one more thing too. I'm sorry.
Sure.
The Bible is very hard to read for me, and it's very confusing with all the names and the places, and it's very confusing. So I did other research too, and I found a website that really it didn't analyze the chapters, but it kind of reworded it so that I understood it. And I just kind of wanted to share it. It's called Totally History. And I really, I kept going back and forth between the Bible and between that to be able to understand it better. And I was really impressed by that website, by the way.
Okay. I have to check it out and take a look at it, and definitely want to do it. So that's good. And yeah, there's definitely resources out there that will help for sure. And that's good for sure.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Okay. So as we see here on this map, as you can see, once again, just a reminder that these are real live places. Here is the modern day Europe, and here, as you see, is the boot of Italy. And you can see right up here in this corner is Rome, where we know that Paul is going to be going. Down here is Jerusalem, where he was taken. And even in the modern day, you still see Jerusalem, you see Rome, you see Malta, you see Corinth, you see Thessalonica, and all of these different places. And you see all of this. It just reminds you that this is a real life story happening in a real life place. The third missionary journey is where we left Paul at the end of our time last week. And if you remember, Paul was standing trial before Felix. He gave his defense, and basically he came with his wife Drusilla, who was also Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Jesus Christ. And as Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and judgment, Felix was afraid, probably under conviction, as we would say in good Baptist circles, right? And he says, that's enough for now. If you're going to leave, and when I find it convenient, I'll send for you. And at the same time, he was hoping Paul would offer him a bribe. So he sent for him frequently and talked to him. But then we realize here, when 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, who, because of Felix, wanted to grant a favor to the Jews. He left Paul in prison. And so we see that there's at least 2 full years of this imprisonment that's kept Paul in one place, in the place called Caesarea. And let's be very clear. I want to talk a little bit about something that Leroy referenced a little earlier, the people that Paul stood before, because as he mentioned, the angel of the Lord had said, and the Spirit revealed to Paul in a dream, I believe, that he would stand before kings and that he would share the gospel message. And so this is very clear now. In Acts 23, where we talked about last week, Paul stood before the Sanhedrin. Now, is the Sanhedrin Roman or is it Jewish? This is kind of a little pop quiz here. You guys remember, is the Sanhedrin Roman or Jewish? You remember?
Jewish.
Yes, that's right. It is Jewish. It is Jewish. That's right. And so the Sanhedrin happens in Jerusalem. They put Paul on trial. And if you remember, there were about 40 Jews that wanted to assassinate him. They took a vow that they would not eat or drink. No, I think it was just they would not eat until Paul was dead. Now, those men either broke that vow or they died of starvation because Paul lived a number of years later. But Acts 23, we know that Paul's nephew helped to thwart the plan of those people and tried to get him out of Jerusalem, because they figured if they had a chance of getting this world traveler, they better get him while he was in town. And so they tried. The plan was thwarted, and he was transferred to Caesarea, which was where the governor's, headquarters and palace was. That's where we pick it up in chapter 24 that we talked about. And Governor Felix was there. There was a trial that was heard. No decision was made. Felix left Paul in prison, hoping for that bribe, a full 2 years as that favor to the Jews that we talked about. And so you see here, Paul's missionary ? Journey to Rome. This is where Leroy was getting all to my spot before I could get to my spot. So I was pretty frustrated about it. But yes, Leroy, I do agree with you, my friend. This is a missionary journey. You're going to see some of the biggest influencers, and as we will read, you're on a ship with 276 souls that you have an opportunity to share God's power and God's words with. And in many ways, it was a powerful and incredible missionary journey. He was just so happened that he was in chains and couldn't end his missionary journey the way that he wanted to or when he wanted to. But he did have the opportunity to do the very thing he was trying to do. And so let me just say, if you guys see my little arrow here, just kind of making sure that you guys see, this is not perfect. And I actually tend to think it's probably maybe 1 year off, where it was probably 58 to 62 or 63, but somewhere in that neighborhood. And this is all kind of in general area. But here's Jerusalem. Here is Caesarea on the coast, where the governor's mansions were, government's principals, and so palaces, excuse me. And you remember last week I talked about how you would hug the coastline, because the further out into the water that you got, the more dangerous the weather would be and become. And so as you see here, he's transferred to Caesarea. boards a ship, goes to Sidon, boards a ship, and travels this way. Now, he wants to get to Rome, but he has to go where the ships go, because not every ship is going to Rome, and not every ship that is going to Rome is starting in Sidon. And so what you do is you kind of hopscotch. You catch your plane, you connecting flight through Atlanta, right? We all get that, right? That's something that happens in our modern world. Well, in that world, you were probably going to be on a cargo ship. The main purpose was cargo moving, not people. But you see that you would catch a thing, you'd wait a little while, and then you catch another boat that's going to take you closer and closer and closer. And eventually, the closer that you got and the larger the city that you were in, the more likely is that you would actually go to Rome. And so what they had done basically was send Paul with a centurion to go to Rome and get him there, but it just wasn't like a direct flight. And they were also going to hug the coastline, so they weren't out in the water where it was more dangerous and more apt to have weather that would cause them to have a shipwreck. Dun, dun, dun. This is foreshadowing. All right, you guys with me? All right, here we go. Let's keep moving. Acts chapter 25, Paul's trial before Festus. 3 days before or after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented charges against Paul. They requested Festus as a favor to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there. So basically, the Roman governors had certain terms, just like we do, and Felix's term was up, and Festus replaced him. And in the process, he goes to Jerusalem, goes and sees the people that he's trying to be ruling. And they tell him, what about this deal with Paul? What are we going to do about that? He said, well, you can come and see him in Caesarea. So after spending 8 or 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. And the next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. So when Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, and they brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. I've done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Now, hit pause. I don't really know if Paul knew what was going on, but Paul probably had a good idea that if I go back to Jerusalem, I probably will not live to see another day. These guys want my head in the worst way, and I'm not going back where there's more people who want my head. So he stays and says this, I am now standing before Caesar's court, which is where I ought to be tried, and I have not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. Paul's not an idiot. He's not a country bumpkin. He's not a backwater yokel who hasn't figured out that there's politics involved here. He knows what's going on. He knows that his life's in danger if he goes with these people that basically his judge is saying, well, why don't you just go back that way? So Paul says, if, however, I'm guilty of doing anything deserving death, I don't refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I see what you're doing, and I'm not going to let it happen. I appeal to Caesar. Huge, huge thing. Now he's not just in the governor's palace. He's going to go all the way to Caesar, which Roman citizens had the right to appeal to Caesar. And that's what Paul does here. And it's a pretty big deal. And after Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. Basically, he couldn't refuse this request without it being a big deal. And so he's on his way to Rome. So who did Paul stand before? The Sanhedrin, Governor Felix that we've already talked about. And then when Felix is replaced, he stands before Governor Festus, still in Caesarea. His term is over. The new governor comes. He hears that, tries to transfer Paul back to Jerusalem with that ambush. Paul appears to Caesar and Festus agrees. So Paul stays in Caesarea. But then this happens. King Agrippa, who is the king in Jerusalem at this time, decides to come and see what's going on, meet with Festus, meet the new governor in town. And as this is all going on, Paul stands before him too. Can you guys see how God is at work? And y'all give me a thumbs up if y'all see that. He's putting him in front of every single important person in that area. And then he's going to move him to Rome, and he's going to put him in front of more important people. Kings, Caesars, emperors, governors, doesn't matter. He's doing it, and it's all according to God's plan. King Agrippa pays a political visit to new governor Festus. They discuss Paul's case, and Agrippa wants to hear Paul, so he's heard with Bernice, his wife, there also. Then Paul is sent to Rome. So here's what we see in Acts chapter 26. Then Agrippa says to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." So Paul motions with his hand and begins his defense. "King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusation of the Jews, and especially so because you are well acquainted with the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. The Jewish people all know the way that I have lived ever since I was a child, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They've known me for a long time, and they can testify, if they're willing, that I conform to the strictest sect of our religion, living as a Pharisee. And now it is because of my hope in what God has promised our ancestors that I'm on trial today. And this is the promise that our 12 tribes were hoping to see fulfilled as they earnestly serve God day and night. King Agrippa, it is because of this hope that these Jews are accusing me. Why should any of you consider it incredible that God can raise the dead? I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the Lord's people in prison. And when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. And they brought many serious charges against, many a time, a little typo there. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished, and I tried to force them to blaspheme. I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities. All right. So what do you think Paul is about to tell King Agrippa about here? You guys have seen Paul. You know his work. You know what he's about to say, don't you? What is he about to say as we jump from verse 11 to 24? Y'all tell me what happens in 12 through 23, because you probably already have figured this out. What's he going to tell him?
His testimony.
His testimony. And his testimony specifically is called the blank blank experience, not the Jimi Hendrix experience, just in case you were wondering. If you're old, you think that's funny. If you're young, you have no idea what I'm talking about. What is he about to say? His testimony is a Damascus Road experience. Very good, you guys. He's about to tell him what happened on the Damascus Road. Okay. And you are right. That's exactly what he says. Paul has one note, and he plays it, and he plays it, and he plays it. He twists it just a touch to fit each circumstance, but he ain't looking for a new story. He's going to tell the same old story, because the same old story has huge power. And can I just say, you don't need to be the best preacher or the best teacher or know the Bible front to back. If you have a story of what God has done for you, you don't have to find three more things. You don't have to figure out other stuff. You just tell your story, tell your story, tell your story, and it will always resonate if it's true and it comes from the heart. Right? Can I get an amen or a thumbs up?
Amen.
That's the truth, right?
Amen.
You know, God has saved us from what we used to be. That's all that people really want. You know, they can figure out the Bible stuff later, but what they really want to know is, did God change your life, and how did it happen, and how was it for you before, and how is it for you now? That's what Paul's talking about in this Damascus Road. So at this point, Festus interrupts Paul's defense. He interrupts Paul's story from the Damascus Road. And he says, "You're out of your mind, Paul." He's shouting. "Your great learning is driving you insane." "I'm not insane, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I'm saying here is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it wasn't done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you do." And then Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think you can, in such a short time, persuade me to be a Christian?" And Paul replies, "Short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but everyone who's listening here to me today may become what I am, except for these chains." And I can almost see Paul lifting his hands up and saying, "Everything about me is what I want for you, except for this, just don't want you to be the prisoner." And so the king rose, with him the governor and Bernice and all of those sitting with him. And after they left the room, they began saying to one another, "This man isn't doing anything that deserves death or even imprisonment." All right. So what jumps out to you guys here? Is there something that jumps out to you?
You know,
I thought I heard
well,
somebody.
they, the Festus was trying to get bribes, and they kept trying to please the Jews, and they kept, and they kept on, and they kept realizing this, we shouldn't be holding this guy. Why is he here? But it just, and it seemed like Paul would talk him into, well, they later on, they trying to say that if he hadn't mentioned Caesar, we probably would have let him go by now. But God has a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. And God's work is bigger than our comfort, I think if you laid it out and said, "Paul, on the one hand, you can have your freedom, or you can stand before the most powerful and influential people in the world and tell them your story and tell them what God has done for you, which one would you do?" And I really genuinely think that Paul would say, "Man, if I had a chance to share the gospel with these people, let me do that no matter what it costs me." And it cost him his freedom. Eventually, we're going to talk about it. It cost him his life, not this imprisonment, but probably the next. But I think that's a trade that he was willing to make if he could do what he did. And it's powerful. It's really cool. Great stuff. Anybody else, any other observation that just jumps out to you as we listen? Anyone?
His boldness, the way he talked to the king and the way he told him, what I'm saying is true, and you know the scripture as well, and you believe the prophets. Because I'm assuming this guy is Roman, right?
Well, the King Agrippa was probably Jewish, but
Okay.
Festus, but Festus was definitely Roman.
Roman. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And this actually brings me to something that jumped out to me. I underlined it here. If you ever think to yourself that Paul was some backwoods yokel, this is somebody who was appointed as a governor, and he hollers out in the middle of Paul's statements, "Your great learning is driving you insane." Now, what he's telling us is that I see that you have done a lot of studying and you are intelligent, but it's taken you too far. You guys see that? But just notice, this is a very powerful, very sophisticated man who clearly sees in Paul somebody who is highly, highly educated. You guys see that? You understand what I'm saying? And so I think sometimes we don't get the full sense of the Bible characters, and we just kind of think of them as what we saw in flannel graph, when we were in Sunday school. But I'm telling you, Paul carried himself and could handle himself, just like we talked about when he talked with the Athenians, man. He talked with the Athenians like an Athenian. He talked with the Jews like a Jew. He talked with the governor in a way that impressed him, to the point of where he said, "Your great learning has gotten the best of you and taken you too far. You've gone too deep in this learning," right? And so it jumps out to me that Paul he's not simple, but he is truly keeping it simple for the reason that all could be understood. I think that's important. So good stuff. In my view, really, really powerful thing to notice. Anyone else? One more moment here. If not, we can keep moving. Anything else jump out to you? Anyone?
Paul had a little more time, he would have got him.
I think he would have too. If you didn't hear what Leroy said, he said if Paul had just a little bit more time, he'd have gotten him. And I think he's right. And I'm going to tell you something. This is where actually in the King James Version, he actually says something in the King James Version and the New International. They interpret it in two different ways. It's a similar construction of the sentence in the Greek. But in the King James Version, he says, Paul, you've almost persuaded me to be a Christian. Almost thou hast persuaded me to be a Christian. And that's in the King James Version. And the way that Paul responds, I kind of like that better than I like the NIV translation, to be honest. And most of the time, about 95% of the time, I prefer the NIV translation. But in that one, the King James Version hit it in a different way. And I liked it. But I agree. This close, man, this close to getting them. All right. Here's what we're going to see. All right. Paul's missionary journey to Rome. He leaves in Caesarea. He goes to Sidon. They come along. And this is the story of his sailing for Rome. When it's decided that we would sail for Italy, who's there now to go along with Paul? Who is that?
Luke.
That's right.
Is that Luke?
That is Luke. Dr. Luke is there to pass the time and to be a blessing to Paul. Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adretium. Missed that one, but y'all helped me out there. About to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia. We put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. And when we sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed in Myra and Lycia. Then the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. You see what I'm saying? They made the connecting flight and through Atlanta, right? So we're slowly making headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cydnus. But then the wind did not allow us to hold our course, so we sailed on the lee of Crete opposite Salmone. So real quickly, notice this. They didn't have the outboard motors, right? They had the oars and they had the winds. That's about it. And so if they wanted to go somewhere, they had to wait until the wind was working with them instead of working against them. And so they may be waiting in a port for a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months. And we're going to see when the weather goes bad, they were not anxious to get out there. And we're going to see what that all plays out. If you've already read, you already know where we're going. So we moved along the coast with difficulty, came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost and sailing had already become dangerous because now it was after the Day of Atonement. That's also known as Yom Kippur, which usually happens late September through mid-October. So as the year is getting late, it's becoming more and more dangerous by the day. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bringing about great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Now, stop for a second. He probably needed to listen to Paul because of how Paul was close to the Lord, but he thought he was making the smart decision by listening to the seamen, right? And in normal situation, that's the right thing. But when God's involved, this is going to be powerful because the seamen are saying, no, it's fine. Paul says, no, it's not. And so the open door is right there when they hit what they're about to hit. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. They were coming all the way to Arizona, y'all. And this was a harbor in Crete facing both south and northwest. Some of y'all are awake. Then a gentle wind began to blow, and they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the nor'easter swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and we were driven along. You hear what's going on? They were trying to get out of the middle of this storm, but they couldn't. They took down the sails and they just let the ship be driven by the waves and the winds wherever it would go. And as we passed the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So the men hoisted it aboard. In other words, it was so rough that they thought they were going to lose the lifeboats. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. I mean, this is a beast of a storm that they are stuck in the middle of. They were afraid they were going to run aground in the sandbars at Syrtis, so they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, I told you so." That's what he says, but he said it in another way. He says, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete, and then you would have been spared yourselves this damage and this loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith that faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.'" So that's some craziness going on there, y'all. It's crazy, right? Let me see here. On the 14th night, we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea. When about midnight, the sailors sensed that we were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 foot deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found that it was only 90 foot deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors left the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. "For the last 14 days, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. But now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head." After he said this, he took some bread, gave thanks to God in front of them all. He broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged. They ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. So they cut loose the anchors, left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. And they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. So the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life, kept them from carrying out their plan. So he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. And the rest were to get there on planks or on any piece of the ship that they could. And in this way, everyone reached land safely. That's exciting business, y'all. Isn't that crazy? Powerful stuff. Does anything jump out to any of you guys here in the midst of all this? Anything?
God's promise came true.
Yeah.
No one were dead.
Nobody died. And it's insane to think about it. If you think of, I mean, these people are doing everything that they should not do just to survive. They want the ship light so it doesn't take on water. That's how big the waves must have been. They're lightening the ship by throwing their food overboard. And I'm going to tell you, if you can't see land and you're throwing your food overboard, you are scared to death of the waves. And these were seasoned seafaring men who probably didn't get scared very easily. So this must have been a beast of a storm. And this shipwreck, not claiming a single life of that 276 people, it's pretty powerful. It was an act of God. I really believe that. Good, good. Anyone else? Anything else?
They should have listened though.
See, you know what I love about this passage of scripture? If Paul can say, I told you so, then I can say that to Shelley. She says I can't, but I feel like I can't. I'm just trying to be like the Apostle Paul. That's all I'm saying. It's happened twice in our lives since we've been married for 30 years that I actually could say I told you so. The first time, no, I'm kidding. All right, I'm not going to.
Don't do it.
Don't do it, Randy. You're already digging a hole. Speaking of my beloved wife, she is actually going to share something with you guys. But here's the question. Did you notice let me see. Right here. Yes, right here. Last night, an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before who? Caesar. So the question is, does Paul actually ever stand before Caesar? And I have asked Shelley to read a little something that I found on this website. It's called Bible Questions Answered. And she's got a little something to read, and then I'll kind of pick up in just a second, but it'll give my voice a break and it'll give your ears a break that you would love to enjoy. So Shelley, if you don't mind taking it and running from here, please do.
Okay. While being held in custody in Caesarea, Paul appealed to have his court case heard by Caesar himself, as was his right as a Roman citizen. Then on his way to Rome, an angel said to Paul, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So we know Paul must have stood before Caesar, although the actual record of it is not found in the Bible. It was prophesied that he would preach before Gentiles and kings, and so his appearance before Caesar was a fulfillment of this prophecy. Later, when writing to the Philippians from Rome, Paul wrote, all the saints greet you, especially those of Caesar's household. So it seems that he made friends with those in the household of Caesar while waiting for his case to be heard. The emperor at the time was the tyrannical Nero, although he was actually relatively sane at this stage of his reign. The empress, Poppaea, his second wife maybe, may have influenced him, as according to Josephus, she was a worshiper of the true God and probably favorably disposed to Christians. About 200 years later, Eusebius recorded that after defending himself successfully, it is currently reported that the apostle again went forth to proclaim the gospel and afterwards came to Rome a second time and was martyred under Nero. There are also many other early church writings which say he was released and embarked on new missionary journals, notably to Spain. And there you go.
All right. Thank you, babe. Appreciate that. And you can see here, this is the thing. Ultimately, we don't have that written because as Acts ends, as we'll see in just a few minutes, we see that Paul is there in Rome and waiting there in Rome, but we do not see him stand before Caesar. But we believe that it did happen, and that as he writes there, as he is being kept in that prison, and Philippians is a prison epistle, he says, all of those who belong to Caesar's household send you a greeting as the church. And so that's a really important little clue that we see. Let's also be very clear. Paul had two opportunities. According to church history, Paul stands before Emperor Caesar Nero, probably wants to be pardoned in this situation, and then later is brought back, and Nero instead has gone pretty insane and is killing people like crazy. I mean, he killed his mother, he's killed other people. I mean, you can go back and see he is just a whack job. He's the guy who was fiddling while Rome burned and probably set the fire himself, if you guys remember, in 64 AD. And he blamed it on Christians. And eventually, he is probably the one who beheaded Paul when he dies. And so you can look here. This is kind of an approximate timeline of the life of the Apostle Paul. Probably was released after this 2 years in prison that we're talking about 62 to 63. He most likely went on a missionary journey to Crete, Nicopolis, and some other places that he refers to when he's talking to Titus and Timothy in his pastoral epistles. Probably he did a possible missionary journey to Spain. There are a few what they call early church fathers, including Pope Clement I, who ruled from 88 to 99, who said that, you know, along with Eusebius that Shelley just mentioned, that he had taken time to go to Spain and he had gone as far as the Western Empire would allow him to go. More than likely, he was rearrested about 65 to 66, imprisoned again, and likely writing 2 Timothy at the end of his time, and then probably beheaded around 65 to 67 AD by Emperor Caesar Nero for probably standing before him the second time. And so we see all of this stuff has happened, and all of this is happening here, but there is time that we know about 62 to 63 AD to about 65 to 67. We don't know what Paul was doing. We do have some letters that do survive. All right, so that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of Paul and what all is happening. I'm going to keep moving here. Ashore on Malta. If you remember the story, let me just kind of give you the story. He goes ashore on Malta. That's the island that they are shipwrecked on. And as he's there, he's helping to gather wood for a fire, and a snake latches onto his hand. The people on the island say, "This is insane. This guy escapes the ocean trying to kill him, but he must have really screwed up big time because the gods won't let him live. They've put a viper on his hand." Paul shakes the thing off, throws it into the fire. For me, it would have been a lot more like, like that, because I'm just scared half to death of snakes. I think the snakes are literally the devil, and figuratively as well. And so he shakes the snake off, freaks out all of the people because they're expecting him to swell up and die. And he does not have a single bit of poison that affects him in any way. So they dramatically shift. And this is the way that people are. He's a horrible person. He's a murderer. And then they turn around and say, no, he's not. He's a god, you know, because he lived and didn't have any problems. So they do a 180 and they think he's perfect, you know. So that's what happens. They put Paul back on a ship and off they go, continuing to go to Rome. And in Acts 28, the brothers and sisters had heard that they were coming. They traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. And at the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with a Roman soldier to guard him. And it goes on and it says here, we'll just jump all the way down. And it says, for 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house and welcomed all who came to see him. He proclaimed the kingdom of God and taught about the Lord Jesus Christ with boldness and without hindrance. And so you see that Paul, in this final missionary journey, as we spoke about, he finally gets to Rome and is there. So he is there in Rome, stays for at least 2 years, probably lives until about 67 AD, and continues to evangelize and continues to share the gospel until the Lord takes him home. All right. Well, folks, man, we could have made this a 12-week study easily, but I don't want to lose you. I'm glad that you have been here and been a part of it all. Tell me something that you've learned from our 8 weeks of readings or 8 weeks of lessons and all that stuff. we've covered a lot of ground, but surely some of this is some new stuff to you. And what do you have that kind of jumps out and you say, you know what, this is really important. I've loved this part and I learned something from this. What is it? Anyone? One or two at least.
Paul was a man that stood on the word. He spoke the truth. And whether people believed or didn't believe, it didn't matter. He continued to forward, press to the mark of the prize of the high calling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, very, very good. His boldness just shines, right? I mean, his absolute disregard for his physical being in order to maintain his spiritual being is dramatic, but it is powerful and it is really amazing. It definitely shines through. Great stuff. Good observation, Frank. Another observation or two before we kind of close it out. Anyone?
Yes. I just wanted to mention, I remember back then you had mentioned that God, he pretty much choose people, any type of person to carry out the word. And I was saying that Saul back then on his trip, even he was blinded by the light and stuff. Even after that, when the scales came off his eyes, he could make a decision to turn back to how he was before and continue to persecute. But because that God fully changed him, he kept on with the word and he fulfilled all the promises that God led him to believe step by step, day by day, with each obstacle that came, he was able to overcome and kept moving. He didn't go back to his ways and he just kept on. So God really knew who he wanted to choose at that point in time to be, to carry out the word, and know that they were going to stay on that path.
Yeah.
Until the day that he died.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love it. You're exactly right. He chose when everything was back to normal. He could have gone back to his normal way of life. But Paul was never, ever the same. From the moment that he hit the ground, he was never the same. And it changed his life until he had no more left. And it is powerful to think about, but it is, you're dead on. I mean, he still had a chance to go back, but it is a testimony to Paul's drive as well as the power of God that he was never the same. Great observation. Great stuff. One more person as we kind of close out. Anything that you've learned, anything that you come away with from your 8-week study in the book of Acts? Anyone?
Yes. Reading the book of Acts really gave me understanding of the verse that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the journey of Paul, no man, well, I can talk for myself, I can't go through that much pain, that much discomfort,
Yeah.
But he kept getting strengthened by Jesus Christ, and he kept pushing forward.
Yeah. Amen. That's good. That's good, Monica. And I appreciate that for sure. Really, really a good observation for sure. All right. Well, let me show you a couple of big takeaways. Big takeaway from week 8 and then from the book, and we're going to call it a night. So Paul, the missionary of the early church, fulfilled the prophecy that God had spoken over him, starting many churches while enduring much suffering. Paul also, while a prisoner, is able to speak to kings, governors, and almost certainly to Nero himself. And Paul was blessed by God to fulfill his goal of reaching Rome with the gospel, as well as the writing of scriptures that's lasted forever and has blessed Christians for more than 19 centuries. I mean, what an amazing life this man lived. It is truly amazing. And the big takeaway for the book of Acts to me is written by Luke. The Acts of the Apostles is the second half of the Gospel of Luke. It shares the important stories in history of the early church and how Christianity shifted from a Jewish religion local to Jerusalem to a world religion that touched the entire Roman Empire. It's the hinge of church history, the book of Acts dramatically sharing the stories of the founders, the foundational teachings, and the founding of the church And I think this is what Acts is all about.
Amen.
Well, guys, thank you so much. I hope it's been enjoyable. I hope that you'll never read the book of Acts the same way. It is a blessing to read it with you guys and kind of come in and bring in some observations and stuff. So I hope it's been a great, enjoyable thing. And I hope that you guys will decide. We've got another Bible study that we'll start here in a few weeks, and I'll make sure that everybody's got the news. But we'd love for you to be a part of that. Anytime you study the word, you move from being a baby Christian to a more mature Christian, and it's an important thing. And this is just a totally different setting. It's a lot more focused on the scriptures and letting the scriptures speak to you and you to others. And it's a different vibe and a different way of growing deeper. So I hope that you guys will make the decision to be a part of it again next time we join in this way. And man, it's been a blessing to do this with you guys. I appreciate y'all and appreciate y'all being so faithful. I'm going to end it here. God bless you. You guys have a great rest of the evening, and I'll see you guys on Sunday and back here in a couple weeks, I hope. Okay. All right. God bless you guys. See y'all later.
Yo,
Good night.
everyone for all the praise.
Good night. Thank you.
Pastor.
Bye-bye.